I am Joshua, 29 years old, and I woke up at 6 in the morning to the sound of my own family trying to break down my apartment door with a crowbar. Before I tell you about how I legally and completely destroyed their entire lives in return, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. The heavy metal struck the solid oak of my front door with a sickening thud. The wood groaned, a sharp crack echoing through my quiet living room. Dust sprinkled down from the doorframe. Then came my father's voice, muffled but completely unhinged, shouting from the hallway. He was demanding I open the door right that second, screaming that I had ruined the family, ruined his life, and that I was going to pay. My mother was right behind him, her voice shrill and hysterical, while my older brother Matthew slammed his fist against the peephole. I didn't panic. I didn't reach for my phone to call for help right away. Instead, I stood in my kitchen, barefoot on the cold tile, holding a warm mug of black coffee. I took a slow sip. I watched the door handle violently shake. On my kitchen island rested a thick, heavy manila folder. Inside that folder was a mountain of legal documents, bank statements, and absolute proof of the financial crimes my family had committed against the one person who actually mattered to me. I was completely calm because this entire meltdown happening in my hallway was exactly what I had planned. To understand why my father was currently trying to commit a felony just to get his hands on me, you have to understand how we got here. The truth didn't begin with a crowbar. It began exactly 8 months ago, sitting around my parents' massive mahogany dining table. That night, the air in the room was thick with the usual suffocating tension. My parents had invited me and my fiancée, Chloe, over for what they called a celebration dinner. Matthew, my older brother, was getting married. Matthew was the golden child. He was the son, and the rest of us were just expected to orbit him and be grateful for the warmth. Halfway through the main course, my dad cleared his throat. He reached into his suit jacket because, yes, my father wore a suit jacket to dinner in his own home just to project authority, and pulled out a thick, sealed envelope. He didn't even look at me. He locked eyes with Matthew, his face glowing with a disturbing level of pride, and slid the envelope across the table. "Your mother and I have been talking," Dad said, his voice booming like he was addressing a boardroom instead of his son's. "We know weddings are expensive. We want you to have the best. So we decided to give your wedding fund to Matthew. He deserves a royal wedding, and considering his recent promotion, it's only fitting we match his level of success." The room completely froze. My mother nodded vigorously, a tight, approving smile on her face. Matthew picked up the envelope, weighing it in his hand, a smug, arrogant smirk pulling at the corners of his mouth. I didn't say a word. I just sat there. That money was originally my college fund. When I decided to skip a 4-year university to build my own freelance design business, my parents told me they would hold onto it for my future wedding. It was a promise they had repeated for years. And now, with a casual flick of the wrist, they were handing it to a guy who already made 6 figures, just so he could buy a bigger ice sculpture or a more ridiculous floral arrangement. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just turned my head and looked at Chloe. She was sitting next to me, her posture perfectly straight. Chloe wore a simple beige sweater and her hair was pulled back in a standard clip. She looked normal, quiet, unassuming, but I saw the fire flash in her dark eyes. She placed her napkin on the table. She rose slowly from her chair, the legs scraping against the hardwood floor. The sound cut through the silence like a knife. She looked directly at my father, then down at Matthew, and finally over to me. "Should I tell them what I do for a living?" she asked me, her voice dangerously calm. I reached out and gently grabbed her hand. I squeezed her fingers. "Not yet," I whispered. "Let them have this." My dad scoffed, rolling his eyes as he cut into his steak. "Please, Joshua, let's not make a scene. We all know you chose a different path. Stability matters. A regular salary matters. You can't expect us to fund a hypothetical future when your brother is building a legacy right now." I let the insult wash over me. I had spent my entire life learning how to absorb their hits. But as I sat there, looking at the pure greed radiating from my parents and my brother, I realized something fundamental had broken inside me. I just didn't know yet that taking my money was only the beginning. The real nightmare, the sickening betrayal that would eventually lead to a crowbar at my door, was still hiding in the shadows. Growing up in that house felt like living in a museum dedicated to someone else's life. If you walked into the main hallway, you wouldn't even know two children lived there. It was entirely devoted to Matthew. We called it the Wall of Fame. Every single square inch of the pristine white drywall was covered in custom-framed proof of my brother's existence. There were his debate team trophies, perfectly polished. There was the acceptance letter from a top-tier university, mounted on velvet. There were newspaper clippings from when his high school lacrosse team won the state championship. And front and center, a massive, professionally lit photograph of Matthew shaking hands with the regional director of his firm the day he got his first major promotion. My milestones? They didn't exist. When I landed my first major client as a freelance graphic designer, my mother just sighed and asked if it came with health insurance. When I paid off my first car in cash, my dad told me that real men buy real estate, not depreciating assets. My memories lived in the dark spaces between Matthew's frames. I learned very early on how to move through that house without making a sound, without expecting praise, and without asking for love. The only person who actually saw me was the woman who lived just a few blocks away, my grandma Eleanor. She was my mother's mother, but they couldn't have been more different. Where my mother was cold and obsessed with appearances, my grandmother was warm, authentic, and grounded. Her house smelled like dried lavender and baked sugar. Whenever the pressure of my parents' house became too much, I would ride my bike to her place. She would be waiting on the porch, holding a plate of warm, freshly baked cookies. "Eat, Joshua," she would say, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "The sweetness is for balance. The world isn't always fair, so we have to make our own sweetness where we can." She gave softness to a life that often felt like rubbing against sandpaper. She never asked me about my income. She asked me about my art. She asked me if I was happy. When I started dating Chloe, Grandma Eleanor was the first person I introduced her to. I was nervous. My family had a habit of shredding anyone who didn't fit their country club aesthetic. Chloe showed up to my grandmother's house wearing worn-in jeans and a plain gray t-shirt. No designer logos, no expensive jewelry, just a quiet, observant kindness in her eyes. Grandma Eleanor took one look at her, poured 2 cups of tea, and they talked for 3 hours straight. They talked about books, about gardening, about the strange ways the world works. When Chloe went to the kitchen to wash the cups, my grandmother leaned across the table, grabbed my arm with surprising strength, and whispered, "Don't you dare lose that girl, Joshua. She's steadier than she looks. She has a spine of steel." She was right. Chloe never tried to impress anyone. She just showed up with a quiet strength that I desperately needed. Unfortunately, my parents didn't share my grandmother's intuition. When I finally brought Chloe to the main house for a formal introduction, it was a disaster. To my parents, Chloe's simplicity was offensive. They equated her lack of flashy brands with a lack of worth. During that first dinner, my dad treated the conversation like an aggressive job interview. "So, Chloe," Dad said, leaning back in his chair and swirling his expensive wine, "Joshua tells me you work in tech. That's a broad field. Are you in customer service? Data entry? What exactly is your salary bracket?" Chloe didn't flinch. She just offered a polite, incredibly neutral smile. "I work on the development and management side. It keeps me busy." My mother let out a short, condescending laugh. "Well, that's nice, dear. As long as you can pay your rent. We always worry about Joshua. He lacks direction. We just hope he isn't dragging you down into a lifestyle you can't afford." Dad pointed his fork at me. "You too should think carefully before making commitments you can't sustain. Life isn't cheap, and love doesn't pay the mortgage." They checked the box in their heads. They decided Chloe was a nobody. They decided she lacked ambition, that she was beneath Matthew's fiancée, a woman who came from a wealthy family and made sure everyone knew it. They never bothered to ask what level we were actually playing on. They just assumed we were at the bottom. A few weeks after they stole my wedding fund, the wedding planning for Matthew kicked into overdrive. The house became a war zone of floral samples, catering menus, and guest lists. I tried to stay out of the way, but the tension was thick enough to choke on. One Sunday afternoon, I was at Grandma Eleanor's house, helping her prune the rose bushes in her backyard. I was quiet, my jaw tight, thinking about the look on my brother's face when he took my money. Grandma noticed. She always did. She clipped a dead flower from the stem, her hands slightly shaking but her movements precise. She didn't look at me when she spoke. "They are very loud right now, your parents," she said softly. "Very loud about this wedding. Very loud about money. They just want Matthew to look good," I muttered, ripping a weed out of the dirt. Grandma shook her head, a deep sadness settling over her features. "No, Joshua. People who are secure don't need to shout about it. Sometimes the loudest rooms have the least truth in them. Be careful. I feel a storm coming." I didn't fully understand her warning then. I didn't know that the storm she felt was already gathering directly over her own head. The storm officially made landfall 2 weeks later, and it arrived in the form of a midnight black Porsche 911. I was pulling into my parents' driveway to drop off some mail when I saw it. The car was gleaming in the afternoon sun, aggressively parked right in the middle of the driveway. Matthew was leaning against the hood, wearing designer sunglasses, laughing loudly with his best friend and groomsman, Julian. As I walked up, Julian nudged Matthew and pointed at my beat-up sedan. "Hey man, tell your brother he parked his antique a little too close to the masterpiece." Matthew laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Don't worry about it. Joshua's used to staying in his lane." He patted the hood of the sports car. "What do you think, little brother? Early wedding present to myself. Gotta look the part of a successful husband, right?" "Nice car," I said flatly, ignoring the insult. "How are you affording the insurance on top of a destination wedding?" Matthew's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second, his eyes darting away before snapping back with renewed arrogance. "Don't worry about my finances, freelancer. I have my ways. Some of us actually know how to leverage our assets." I walked past them and went inside, a strange knot forming in my stomach. Matthew made good money, sure, but a brand new Porsche? It didn't add up. But I pushed the thought away. I had bigger things to worry about. My parents had organized a lavish, 4-day weekend trip to an exclusive resort to celebrate the final countdown to Matthew's wedding. Surprisingly, they had invited Grandma Eleanor to come along. They said it was to honor the matriarch of the family. The morning of the flight, I drove Grandma to the airport to meet them. She was so excited. She had spent the entire week preparing. She bought a new navy blue blouse, got her hair done, and packed a small, neat suitcase. As we walked through the sliding glass doors of the terminal, she clutched her purse tightly, a hopeful, radiant smile on her face. We found my parents, Matthew, and his fiancée standing by the premium check-in counter. They were surrounded by massive, hard-shell luggage, laughing and drinking expensive iced coffees. "Eleanor, you made it," my mother said, offering a stiff, one-armed hug that didn't reach her eyes. "Of course I did," Grandma beamed. "I wouldn't miss this for the world." We all walked up to the counter. The ticket agent, a young woman whose name tag read Amanda, began typing on her keyboard. She checked my parents' passports. She checked Matthew's. Then, she took Grandma Eleanor's ID. Amanda typed for a few seconds. She frowned. She hit the backspace key heavily. She typed again. The silence at the counter began to stretch, turning brittle. "I'm sorry, ma'am," Amanda said, looking up with genuine confusion. "There's no reservation under this name." The air in the terminal seemed to vanish. I stepped forward, my heart suddenly hammering against my ribs. "What do you mean?" "Check again. Eleanor Davis." "I'm looking right at the flight manifest, sir," Amanda replied sympathetically. "I have Robert, Sarah, Matthew, and Jessica. There is no fifth ticket booked. In fact, this flight is entirely sold out. There isn't a single seat left." I spun around to look at my parents. They exchanged a rapid, calculated glance. It lasted less than a second, but I caught it. It wasn't a look of surprise. It was a look of guilt. "Oh my goodness!" my mother gasped, pressing a hand to her chest in a horrible display of fake shock. "Robert, what happened? The travel agent must have made a mistake. I specifically told them 5 tickets. My dad shook his head, looking deeply inconvenienced rather than upset. "It's a system glitch. Typical airlines. Look, Eleanor, I am so sorry. There's nothing we can do right now. The flight is boarding in 20 minutes. Grandma Eleanor stood there, completely frozen. The radiant smile she had worn all morning slowly melted off her face, replaced by a look of profound, crushing humiliation. Her hand trembled as she reached out and gently took her ID back from Amanda. Maybe I can take a later flight?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the airport. "Mom, it's a private resort. The logistics are too complicated now," my mother said quickly, already grabbing the handle of her suitcase. "Joshua is right here. He can take you home. We'll bring you back a nice souvenir. Okay?" They didn't wait for an answer. Matthew didn't even say goodbye. He was already checking his phone and walking toward the security line. My parents gave her one last pitying look before turning their backs and walking away, leaving an 80-year-old woman standing in the middle of a crowded airport, completely abandoned. Humiliation settles differently when it lands on someone you love. Feels heavier. It feels like a physical blow to the chest. I felt a white-hot fury ignite in my blood, a rage so intense it blurred my vision. I didn't cause a scene. I just gently placed my hand on Grandma's back and guided her out of the terminal. The drive home was agonizingly silent. She sat straight up in the passenger seat, her hands folded neatly in her lap, staring blankly out the window as the city rolled by. Every few minutes, she gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod, as if she were having a conversation in her head that only she could hear. When we finally pulled into her driveway, I helped her out of the car. She moved slowly, her bones seeming heavier, weighed down by the sheer disrespect of her own flesh and blood. She didn't go into the living room. She walked straight through the house, opened the back door, and stepped out into her rose garden. I stood in the doorway watching her. She knelt in the dirt, ruining her new navy blouse. She reached out and touched a wilted leaf on a rose stem, her fingers trembling. "They didn't forget me, Joshua," she said, her voice cracking, breaking the silence of the garden. I stepped down onto the grass. "Grandma, it was an airline mistake." "Don't," she interrupted, looking up at me. Her eyes were filled with tears, but they were also incredibly sharp. "Don't insult my intelligence and don't defend them. People reveal their true character in small choices. That was a choice. They decided I wasn't necessary." She looked back down at the dirt. "They used me, Joshua, and I think they've been using me for a very long time." That night, I went back to my apartment. Chloe was sitting on the couch, reading a book. When she saw my face, she immediately put the book down. I told her everything. I told her about the airport, the fake shock, the utter cruelty of leaving her behind. I opened my laptop. I had access to a shared family email account that my dad used for household bills, a holdover from when I helped them set up their home network years ago. He thought I had deleted my access. I hadn't. I searched the inbox for the airline name. I found the original booking confirmation from 2 months ago. There were 5 tickets. But then, I found an email from 3 weeks ago. It was a cancellation confirmation. My father had explicitly canceled Grandma Eleanor's economy ticket. And with the refunded money plus a massive extra payment, he had upgraded Matthew and his fiancée to first class. They didn't forget her. They sold her seat so the golden child could drink champagne before takeoff. I stared at the screen, the blue light reflecting in my eyes. The storm had fully arrived, and I was going to make sure it tore their lives apart. The discovery of the canceled ticket was a sickening blow, but it was just the surface of the rot. If my parents were willing to abandon my grandmother at an airport for a first-class upgrade, I needed to know what else they were capable of. Chloe sat beside me on the couch, staring at the airline receipt on my laptop. Her expression was completely unreadable, a mask of cold, calculating focus. If they lie about a plane ticket, they lie about money, Chloe said quietly. Joshua, how much control does your father have over her finances? The question hit me like a physical strike. Years ago, when my grandfather passed away, Grandma Eleanor was overwhelmed. She had a substantial inheritance, a massive retirement fund, and a fully paid-off house. My father, playing the role of the responsible son-in-law, had volunteered to manage her accounts to take the stress off her. He introduced her to a financial advisor named Carter. Carter was practically treated like family. He came to our house for Thanksgiving, drank scotch with my dad, and always called my mom Sarah. He has full power of attorney? I whispered, the realization making my blood run cold. You think they've crossed that line? Chloe asked, her eyes locking onto mine. I think they erased it long ago, I replied. My voice didn't shake. I wasn't sad anymore. I was weaponized. The next morning, I drove to Grandma's house. I sat her down at the kitchen table and told her about the canceled ticket. I showed her the email. She didn't cry. She just stared at the piece of paper, her jaw setting into a hard, rigid line. The grief from yesterday had burned away, leaving nothing but clarity. Grandma, I need to see your bank statements, not the summaries Dad prints out for you. I need the actual logins, the raw data. She walked to her bedroom and pulled a small leather notebook from beneath her mattress. It had all her passwords. Chloe and I spent the next 48 hours submerged in a digital paper trail of pure betrayal. We printed out years of bank statements, investment portfolios, and wire transfers, spreading them across my living room floor. It was a massacre. My parents hadn't just dipped into her funds. They had practically attached a hose to her life savings. There were administrative fees being siphoned off every month into an LLC registered under my mother's name. There were massive, unauthorized withdrawals listed as home improvement loans that strangely coincided with the exact dates my parents remodeled their kitchen and installed a pool. And then I found the smoking gun, a recurring monthly withdrawal of $2,500. It started exactly a week before Matthew brought that new car to the house. The memo line on the transfer simply read, Auto lease Porsche Fin SVCs. I gripped the paper so hard my knuckles turned white. Matthew's entire wealthy persona, the car he used to mock my career, the image he was projecting to his wealthy fiancée, it was all being funded by an 80-year-old woman's retirement money. And Carter, the trusted family financial advisor, had manually approved every single transfer, bypassing the fraud alerts by claiming he had verbal consent from my grandmother. We don't wait for them to do it again, Chloe said, standing over the sea of evidence. We lock the doors right now. We needed a professional. We needed someone who didn't care about my father's country club status or my mother's fake tears. That afternoon, we walked into a sleek, imposing office building downtown. We had an appointment with Mr. Hayes, a senior attorney specializing in elder financial abuse and fiduciary fraud. He was a tall, imposing man with graying hair and eyes that looked like they could cut glass. We laid the files on his massive mahogany desk. He listened to my grandmother explain how she had been kept in the dark, how her questions were brushed off, and how she had been abandoned at the airport. He reviewed the unauthorized withdrawals, the forged consent forms from Carter, and the Porsche lease payments. Mr. Hayes didn't flinch. He didn't offer empty sympathies. He just tapped his pen against the desk. This isn't just unethical, Mr. Davis, the lawyer said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. This is systematic financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. The power of attorney was weaponized. Carter's involvement makes this a multi-party conspiracy. They have drained over $100,000. Grandma sat up perfectly straight. I want it back, every single dime, and I want them to look me in the eye when they realize they've been caught. We can file an emergency injunction to freeze the accounts immediately, Mr. Hayes explained. We will revoke his power of attorney today, and then we issue a formal notice for mandatory legal mediation. If they refuse or lie, we take it to a criminal court. The room shifted. For years, my family had held all the power. They dictated who was successful, who was worthy, and who was invisible. But sitting in that office, staring at the airtight legal trap we had just built, I felt the balance of power snap violently into my hands. We spent the next few days preparing. My parents and Matthew were still at the luxury resort, posting photos on social media, drinking cocktails paid for by stolen money, completely oblivious to the fact that the ground beneath them had turned into a sinkhole. They were scheduled to land on a Thursday afternoon. They expected an empty airport, a comfortable ride home, and a continuation of their perfect, superior lives. They had no idea what was waiting for them at the arrival's gate. Part 5. Climax. The exploding truth, 1,500 words. The arrivals hall of the international terminal was loud, packed with families holding balloons and drivers holding name signs. The air smelled of stale coffee and jet fuel. I stood near the edge of the security railing, my hands shoved deep into my pockets. To my left stood Grandma Eleanor. She wasn't wearing the hopeful smile she had 4 days ago. She wore a sharp black trench coat, her posture rigid, her chin held high. To my right stood Chloe, dressed in her usual plain black sweater, calm and unbothered. And right beside us stood Mr. Hayes, holding a thick, legally binding folder that carried enough explosive power to level my family's entire existence. "Here they come," I murmured. Through the sliding glass doors they emerged. My father, Robert, looked incredibly relaxed, sporting a deep tan and pushing a cart loaded with designer luggage. My mother was laughing, holding onto Matthew's arm. Matthew was walking slightly ahead of his fiancée, scrolling through his phone, looking like a king returning to his kingdom. They carried that breezy, arrogant confidence of people who truly believe the universe exists simply to serve them. My mother spotted us first. She slowed her pace, her laugh dying in her throat. She nudged my father. Dad looked up, his brow furrowing in confusion. He let go of the luggage cart. "Joshua? Eleanor? What are you doing here?" He forced a strained smile, trying to quickly construct a narrative. "Did you guys come to pick us up? I told you we had a car service." He stepped forward, reaching out to hug my grandmother, but she took a deliberate, sharp step backward. The rejection was so physical my father actually stumbled. "I'm not here for a ride, Robert," Grandma Eleanor said, her voice carrying an authority that made the surrounding travelers turn their heads. Matthew rolled his eyes, shoving his phone into his pocket. "Great. Drama immediately upon landing. Listen, Grandma, if this is still about the ticket mix-up, we brought you a really nice silk scarf." "Be quiet, Matthew," I snapped, stepping directly into his line of sight. "Nobody cares about your souvenirs." My mother bristled, her eyes darting nervously toward Mr. Hayes, recognizing the expensive cut of his suit. "Joshua, who is this man? What is going on?" Mr. Hayes didn't wait for an introduction. He stepped forward, his voice perfectly modulated, a professional executioner. "I am Arthur Hayes, legal counsel representing Mrs. Eleanor Davis. We are here to serve you formal notice regarding the unauthorized use of her assets, gross breach of fiduciary duty, and elder financial exploitation." The color drained from my father's face so fast he looked sick. His jaw literally dropped. "What? That's absurd. I manage her accounts. I have power of attorney." "You had power of attorney," Mr. Hayes corrected smoothly, handing him the thick envelope. "It was legally revoked yesterday morning. All associated accounts are currently frozen. We have fully documented the transfer of funds to an LLC in your wife's name, as well as the fraudulent documentation processed by your associate, Carter." "Carter?" My mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Grandma Eleanor took a step closer to my parents. The fragility was completely gone. "You didn't just leave me without a ticket, Robert. You stole from me to upgrade your son. You used my money to remodel your house. You treated me like a bank account that didn't have a pulse." "Mom, please," my father stammered, sweat breaking out on his forehead. You're confused. You gave me permission for those investments. We were doing you a favor. I am not confused, she fired back, her voice ringing off the high ceilings. You explained nothing. You avoided, you minimized, and you lied. You used my trust to fund your own ego. Matthew's composure finally fractured. His arrogant facade shattered, revealing the terrified, spoiled child underneath. He pointed a shaking finger at me. This is you. You're doing this because you're jealous. Because Dad gave me your wedding fund. You're trying to humiliate us. This isn't humiliation, Matthew, I said quietly, enjoying the sheer terror in his eyes. This is accountability. Oh, and by the way, the lease on your Porsche? We stopped the auto draft. I hope you saved up your own money, because they're coming to repossess it. Matthew choked on his breath. His fiancée, standing a few feet away, looked at him in absolute horror. Matthew? What is he talking about? You said you bought that car. Jessica, wait. I can explain. Matthew panicked, reaching for her, but she backed away in disgust. In a desperate attempt to regain control, my mother turned her vitriol toward the easiest target she could find. She glared at Chloe. I know you're behind this. You gold-digging little nobody. You saw Joshua's family had money and you orchestrated this to tear us apart. What do you even know about the real world? The two of you are pathetic losers who don't even have real careers. Chloe didn't flinch. She didn't raise her voice. She simply offered that same polite, neutral smile she gave at that first dinner. You're right, Sarah, Chloe said calmly. I don't talk about my career much. I've been very selective with who I trust. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out her phone. She tapped the screen twice and held it up directly in front of my brother's face. Matthew leaned in to look. It was a digital business card, an article profile from Forbes. His eyes widened. His breath hitched. The arrogant smirk didn't just melt. It was utterly obliterated. He looked from the phone up to Chloe and back to the phone. You! Matthew stammered, his voice barely a whisper. You're CL Vance? You own Nexus Tech. Chloe nodded once. My father blinked rapidly, completely lost. Nexus? What is that? Matthew turned to my dad, looking like he was about to vomit. Dad, Nexus is the corporate software firm. It's the firm my company has been trying to secure a multi-million-dollar contract with for 6 months. My entire promotion is based on landing them. My parents froze. The silence that fell over them was absolute. The nobody they had mocked for wearing cheap sweaters was the CEO of a tech empire. A woman who possessed a net worth that made my family's stolen wealth look like pocket change. Chloe looked directly at my father. Joshua told me you asked about my salary. I didn't want to make you uncomfortable. But to be clear, Robert, success doesn't excuse disrespect. And respect doesn't require success. You judged me because you are shallow. You stole from Eleanor because you are greedy. And your son won't be getting that contract because my company doesn't do business with thieves. My mother looked like she was going to faint. My father stared at the legal papers in his hand as if they were on fire. Matthew just stood there, his world collapsing in real time. We'll see you at mediation, Mr. Hayes stated formally. If you fail to appear, the court will proceed with criminal embezzlement charges. We turned around and walked away. We left them standing in the middle of the airport, surrounded by their expensive luggage, their fake status, and the crushing realization that their entire lives had just been destroyed. This is a moment that changed everything, when I finally regained control of my life. Thank you for your patience in getting this far with me. You are amazing. Please like the video and leave a comment with the number 1 below so I know you've been with me this far. This will not only help more people find this story, but also let me know that my experiences are meaningful to someone. Your support is my biggest motivation to continue sharing the rest of this journey, which brings us back to the present. To 6 o'clock this morning. To the sound of the crowbar destroying the wood around my deadbolt. After the devastation at the airport yesterday, my family had predictably spiraled into a state of absolute, rabid desperation. The realization that their assets were frozen, that Matthew's career was imploding, and that criminal charges were dangling over their heads had driven them completely insane. They couldn't intimidate Mr. Hayes, and they couldn't reach Grandma Eleanor because she was safely staying at a luxury hotel Chloe had booked for her under an alias. So they came for the easiest target they thought they had left. Me. "Open the damn door, Joshua!" My father roared from the hallway, slamming the metal crowbar against the door again. "You call off your lawyer right now. You are ruining this family. You are ruining your brother's life over a misunderstanding. He's not answering, Robert. Break it down!" My mother shrieked, her voice echoing off the concrete walls of my apartment building. "He owes us. We raised him. He can't do this to his own flesh and blood." I took another sip of my coffee. The wood around the lock splintered, a large crack running straight down the center of the door. They were actually going to break in. They were so blinded by their own entitlement that they thought they could just barge into my home and scream me into submission, just like they had done my entire life. But they forgot one crucial detail. I wasn't the quiet, invisible kid anymore. I set my coffee mug down on the kitchen island. I picked up the manila folder. I walked slowly toward the front door. I didn't yell back. I didn't argue. I just reached out, undid the chain, unlocked the deadbolt, and pulled the door open before my father could swing the crowbar again. My dad stumbled forward, the heavy iron tool raised in his right hand. He was panting, his face red and slick with sweat. His designer shirt was untucked and wrinkled. My mother was standing behind him, her hair a mess, her eyes wild with panic. Matthew was leaning against the hallway wall, looking pale, exhausted, and utterly defeated. My father locked eyes with me, gripping the crowbar tightly. "You listen to me, you ungrateful little..." "Drop the weapon, sir. Right now. Drop it on the floor and step back." The voice didn't come from me. It came from the shadows of my apartment hallway, just behind my living room wall. My father froze. His eyes darted past my shoulder. Stepping into the light was Officer Davis, a massive, unsmiling veteran of the city police department. His hand was resting casually but firmly on his service belt. I had called the precinct 20 minutes ago when I saw my father's car speed into my apartment complex parking lot on the security cameras. I told dispatch there were hostile individuals attempting a home invasion. The crowbar slipped from my father's fingers. It hit the hallway floor with a loud, metallic clatter. "Officer, this is a misunderstanding," my dad stammered, taking a massive step backward, raising his hands in immediate surrender. All the rage, all the bravado, all the supposed power he held over me vanished in a millisecond. He was suddenly just a terrified, pathetic man caught committing a crime. "He's my son. This is a family dispute. We just needed to talk to him." Attempting to break down a door with a pry bar is not a family dispute, sir. It's attempted breaking and entering and destruction of property, Officer Davis said, his voice hard. "Step back against the wall. All three of you." My mother began to hyperventilate, pressing her hands against the brick wall of the corridor. "We didn't mean it. We just want to talk. Please, Joshua. Tell him. Don't let them arrest your father." I looked at them, really looked at them. The people who had made me feel small my entire life. The people who had stolen from the woman who loved me, who had mocked the woman I was going to marry, and who had tried to discard me because I didn't fit their aesthetic. They looked incredibly small. "I'm not pressing criminal charges for the door, Officer Davis," I said calmly. My parents let out a massive, synchronized sigh of relief. My mother actually sobbed. "However," I continued, holding up the thick manila folder, "I did need a police presence to ensure the safe delivery of these documents, as the individuals are highly volatile." I stepped out into the hallway. I walked right up to my father. He wouldn't look me in the eye. He stared at the floor, trembling slightly. I took the thick stack of papers out of the folder. It was the formal court summons for the financial mediation, the official discovery documents outlining every single stolen dollar, and a restraining order prohibiting them from contacting Grandma Eleanor. I pressed the papers hard against my father's chest until his hands automatically came up to take them. "This is the reality, Dad," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, but cutting through the silence of the hallway. "You are going to attend that mediation. You are going to sign over the deed to the vacation property you bought with her money. You are going to liquidate your assets to pay back every single cent you stole. If you fight it, if you lie, Mr. Hayes will hand all of this over to the district attorney, and you will go to prison for elder abuse." I turned to Matthew. He couldn't even look at me. He was staring at the wall, completely broken. "And Matthew," I said, "the tow truck is already at your apartment complex. The Porsche is gone. I hope you enjoy the bus ride to your wedding. If the wedding is even still happening." I didn't wait for a response. There was nothing left to say. I turned around, walked back into my apartment, and looked at Officer Davis. "Thank you, officer. I think they're leaving now." Officer Davis nodded, placing his hand on the doorframe. He looked at my father. "You heard the man. Take your papers and leave the premises immediately, or you're all leaving in handcuffs. Move." I closed the door. It didn't shut perfectly because the wood was splintered, but it didn't matter. The barrier was there. I leaned against the broken wood, listening to the sound of their footsteps retreating down the hallway. I heard the elevator ding. I heard the doors close, and then there was just silence. For the first time in my 29 years of life, the suffocating weight of my family was completely gone. The storm they had created had finally subsided, leaving behind a profound, terrifying, and beautiful clarity. They had tried to break down my door, but all they did was permanently lock themselves out of my life. The mandatory legal mediation took place exactly 6 weeks after the disastrous encounter at my apartment door. We didn't meet in a cozy office with warm lighting. We met in a sterile, freezing conference room inside the county courthouse. The walls were painted a lifeless gray. The heavy mahogany table felt like a slab of ice, and the ticking of the wall clock echoed like a hammer. My family looked entirely different from the arrogant people who had strutted through the airport. My father, Robert, wore a suit that suddenly looked 2 sizes too big for him. The arrogant posture was gone. His shoulders slumped, and he kept obsessively rubbing his temples. My mother, Sarah, had dark circles under her eyes, her usual perfect makeup completely abandoned. Matthew sat at the far end of the table, staring blankly at the wood grain, looking like a ghost. Sitting next to my father was Carter, the disgraced financial advisor, sweating profusely and refusing to make eye contact with anyone. On our side of the table, the contrast was absolute. I sat tall, my hands folded on the table. Chloe sat next to me, radiating her usual calm, unshakable confidence. Grandma Eleanor sat at the head of our side, wearing a beautiful floral blouse. She looked younger than she had in years. The heavy burden of their manipulation had been lifted, replaced by a fierce, undeniable dignity. And beside her sat Mr. Hayes, our lawyer, arranging his meticulously organized files with surgical precision. At the head of the entire table sat Mediator Peterson. She was a former judge with steel-gray hair, sharp glasses, and a reputation for being absolutely merciless when it came to elder exploitation. She did not care about my father's country club memberships. She cared about the bank statements in front of her. "Let's get straight to the facts," Mediator Peterson began, her voice cutting through the silent room. "Mr. Davis, your legal counsel has submitted a defense claiming the transferred funds were utilized for the mutual benefit of the family estate. I am looking at a spreadsheet detailing $75,000 spent on a backyard pool installation, luxury kitchen countertops, and a master bathroom renovation at your primary residence. Explain to me how a custom jacuzzi benefits an 80-year-old woman who lives 4 miles away and does not swim." My father cleared his throat. It sounded like dry leaves crushing together. "Your Honor, Madam Mediator." Eleanor was over frequently. "We wanted to create a comfortable environment for her. The house is part of her legacy. It's an investment for the family." Peterson didn't even blink. She picked up another piece of paper. "I also see a withdrawal of $12,000 from her retirement account, which mysteriously matches the exact cost of a first-class flight upgrade and a luxury villa rental for your son. Did she also benefit from the champagne served on that flight while she was left standing at the economy check-in counter? My mother let out a loud, pathetic sob. She buried her face in her hands. We made a mistake. We were just under so much pressure with the wedding. Matthew works so hard for his salary, and we just wanted him to have one perfect week. Please, Eleanor, tell them we love you. Grandma Eleanor looked across the table. Her eyes were completely cold. You love the way I funded your lifestyle, Sarah. You do not love me. You treated my life savings like your personal piggy bank. Mr. Hayes leaned forward. Mediator Peterson, we are not interested in a prolonged negotiation. We have documented $140,000 in unauthorized withdrawals, forged consent forms processed by Mr. Carter, and gross negligence of fiduciary duty. We demand immediate restitution. They will liquidate the vacation home they purchased last year. They will drain their own investment portfolios. Every single cent will be returned to Mrs. Davis through structured, court-monitored payments. If they refuse to sign this agreement today, we walk out of this room and hand the entire file over to the district attorney for criminal prosecution. Carter practically leaped out of his chair. I'll sign. I'll cooperate fully. I have the insurance to cover my portion. Please, I can't lose my license. My father glared at Carter with pure hatred, but he had no leverage left. The walls had completely closed in. He looked at the paperwork pushed across the table. His hands shook violently as he picked up the pen. In that single moment, I watched my father sign away his fake wealth, his stolen status, and his unearned pride. My stolen college fund felt like a distant memory compared to the absolute financial ruin he had just brought upon himself. The session ended. We walked out of the courthouse and stepped into the bright, blinding afternoon sun. My parents and Matthew walked out a few moments later. They looked physically sick. They hurried down the concrete steps, desperate to escape the humiliation. But the universe wasn't finished with them yet. As Matthew reached the sidewalk, a loud, heavy diesel engine roared to life right in front of the building. A massive commercial tow truck was parked next to the curb. And hooked to the back of the truck, its front wheels lifted high into the air, was Matthew's midnight black Porsche. The repo man, a burly guy in a high-visibility vest, was tightening the security chains. Matthew broke into a sprint. Hey, stop. What are you doing? Put that down. The repo man didn't even look up. Vehicle is flagged for critical default on lease payments. I'm taking it back to the dealership, buddy. Talk to the bank. No, wait, I can get the money. Just give me a day. Matthew begged, his voice cracking loudly. The golden child was literally jumping up and down on a public sidewalk, screaming at a tow truck driver. A sleek silver sedan pulled up directly behind the tow truck. The driver's side door opened, and Jessica stepped out, Matthew's fiancée. She had driven separately to meet him after the mediation, demanding to know the truth about the accusations she had heard at the airport. She stood on the sidewalk, watching the man she was supposed to marry beg a repo driver over a car he had rented using his grandmother's money. Matthew turned and saw her. All the blood drained from his face. Jessica, baby, it's a misunderstanding. The bank made an error. Jessica closed her car door. She didn't look angry. She looked completely disgusted. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small velvet box. She walked up to Matthew and pressed the box hard against his chest. There is no error, Matthew, Jessica said, her voice dripping with contempt. I spoke to my father. He pulled the credit reports. You have nothing. Your parents have nothing. You built an entire life out of lies and elder abuse. I'm not marrying a fraud. I'm not dealing with a messy divorce in 2 years because the IRS finally catches up with you. And I am certainly not having kids with a man who steals from his own family, just to fight over custody when you inevitably end up in a jail cell. Jessica, please, the wedding is in 3 weeks. The deposits are paid. The wedding is canceled, she said flatly. Do not ever contact me again. She turned around, got back into her car, and drove away. The tow truck honked its loud horn and pulled away from the curb, dragging the fake symbol of Matthew's success down the street. Matthew collapsed onto the concrete bench next to the courthouse steps, burying his head in his hands, completely alone. He didn't just lose his fiancée and his car. The next morning, his firm officially fired him. Nexus Tech, Chloe's company, had formally sent a letter to his firm's executive board. The letter stated they were pulling all contract negotiations due to severe ethical concerns regarding Matthew's professional and personal conduct. The promotion he had gloated about at dinner was gone. His career was ash. A few weeks later, Grandma Eleanor met with Mr. Hayes one last time. She completely restructured her estate. She secured her inheritance in an ironclad trust. She formally disinherited my father, my mother, and Matthew. They would not see a single dime of her money, and she made it legally binding that they wouldn't even be welcome at her funeral. She severed the rotting branches of her family tree to save the roots. With her finances restored and her peace of mind returned, Chloe and I helped Grandma pack up her old house. It held too many bad memories. We found a beautiful single-story cottage on the edge of town. It had a wraparound porch, huge bay windows that let in the morning light, and a massive backyard. Chloe and I spent 3 weekends tilling the soil, planting rows of hydrangeas, lavender, and vibrant climbing roses. When we finally walked Grandma into the backyard and showed her the garden, she didn't say a word. She just walked over to the nearest rose bush, touched the soft red petals, and smiled a smile so genuine it made my chest ache. It has been 2 years since that morning my father tried to break down my door. 2 years since the storm finally broke and washed all the toxic debris out of our lives. My parents sold their large, empty house. They had to. The court-ordered restitution payments, combined with the legal fees and the loss of their stolen lifestyle, forced them to downsize into a small, cramped apartment on the other side of the state. Matthew moved in with them. He currently works a mid-level administrative job, far away from the corporate elite status he used to worship. They occasionally try to send emails or leave voicemails, usually around the holidays, offering weak apologies wrapped in heavy guilt trips. I delete them without listening. You cannot heal in the same environment that broke you, and I refuse to let their poison back into my blood. My life, however, took a completely different trajectory. The process of protecting my grandmother unlocked something deep inside me. I realized that my graphic design business was successful, but it lacked a true purpose. I started volunteering my skills for a national elder advocacy program. I designed their outreach campaigns, built their digital platforms, and eventually became a full-time board member. I travel across the country, speaking at community centers and legal seminars, teaching older adults how to recognize the signs of financial exploitation and how to protect their assets from predatory family members. I found my voice by fighting for the people who had lost theirs. Chloe and I got married last spring. We didn't have an ice sculpture. We didn't rent a luxury resort. We got married in Grandma Eleanor's backyard, surrounded by the blooming roses and the people who actually cared about us. Chloe wore a simple, elegant white dress. I wore a suit that finally felt like it belonged to me. During the reception, as the sun began to set and string lights illuminated the garden, I walked over to the wooden bench where Grandma was sitting. She was holding a cup of warm tea, watching Chloe dance with some of our close friends. I sat down next to her. The air smelled of lavender and damp earth. It was perfectly peaceful. "You look happy, Joshua," she said softly, not taking her eyes off the dancing crowd. "I am," I replied, "more than I ever thought I could be." She reached over and placed her hand over mine. Her skin was thin, but her grip was steady and warm. "I told you the sweetness was for balance. You just had to fight through the bitter parts to get here." She was right. I spent my entire childhood staring at a wall of fame that had no space for me. I believed the lie that my parents' approval was the ultimate measure of my worth. But out here, under the open sky, holding the hand of the woman who saved me and watching the woman I love laugh in the distance, I realized something incredibly liberating. True family is not defined by shared DNA. Blood makes you related, but loyalty, respect, and unconditional protection make you family. Love does not demand silence. It does not force you to shrink yourself to make other people feel big. And if someone demands you sacrifice your peace, your dignity, or your safety just to keep the peace in the household, they are not your family. They are your captors. Breaking down that door wasn't just about stopping my father from entering my apartment. It was about me finally breaking out of the invisible cage they had kept me in for almost 3 decades. I lost my parents and my brother, but I gained myself. And that is a trade I would make 1,000 times over. Now, before I end this video, I want to take a moment to talk directly to all of you who have stayed with me until the very end. The story I just shared isn't just a dramatic family conflict. It highlights a silent epidemic that happens behind closed doors every single day: elder financial abuse. It is incredibly easy for manipulative family members to weaponize their power of attorney, isolate older adults, and drain their life savings under the disguise of helping. The perpetrators rely on the victim's shame, confusion, and unconditional love to get away with it. They assume no one is watching. They assume the elderly are too frail to fight back. But we can change that. Check on your aging relatives. Ask the hard questions about their finances, their legal documents, and their caretakers. Do not let anyone isolate them. If you see sudden changes in their banking habits, unexplained transfers, or if a family member becomes overly defensive about estate planning, do not stay silent. Trust your instincts and seek professional legal counsel. Protecting our elders is not just a family obligation. It is a moral imperative. They spent their lives building a foundation for us, and they deserve to live their final chapters with absolute dignity, security, and respect. If this story resonated with you, if you agree that we need to stand up and fiercely protect the vulnerable people in our lives from those who seek to exploit them, please drop a comment below and type the word "good," or share the most important lesson you are taking away from my experience. Your engagement helps push this message to more people who might desperately need to hear it right now. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your support. And remember to always protect your peace.